And in teasers, the juice gets neutralized. So if a 6-point teaser is minus 120, it's minus 120, whether you're teasing a team that's, point spread line, let's call it a team favored by 7.5, whether they're 7.5 minus 120 or 7.5 even money, the teaser just neutralizes the VIG altogether in that sense.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have on Matt Landis. He is the host of the Props and Hops podcast, and he is also a VSIN NFL correspondent. In this episode, we talk about his handicapping process and why, in particular, he likes teasers. Matt is also nice enough to share with us a Week 16 NFL bet. And we also get into a number of NFL teams, including Philadelphia, Green Bay, Miami, and Dallas. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Rank Sports Betting newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. In this newsletter, I write about college football and NFL bets that I've made. I also send out a curated list of sports betting tips and news every Saturday morning. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcast episodes, an education through your ears. To check out this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Matt Landis. He is the host of the Props and Hops podcast, and he's also a weekly NFL correspondent for VSIN. Matt, welcome to the show.
Ed, it's surreal to be here. I've listened to so many of your interviews with some of my favorite people in the betting space on this show over the years. I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's week 16 in the season, right? You've got to dig pretty deep in the Rolodex to keep these interviews going, but I appreciate the opportunity nevertheless.
Well, thank you so much for listening, Matt. And no, that's not the case at all. I mean, I actually honestly feel like this is a pretty good week for betting. So I am excited to chat. Matt, I want to know more about your story. Give us a sense more for your background and how you got into betting and NFL betting in particular.
Sure. So I got into betting probably a bit later in life than most of the people you've had on the show. I did grow up as an avid sports fan, and I played baseball through high school, actually got to play with and against 3 pitchers who had pretty solid careers in the majors, and then went to high school with 3 players on the football team who ended up making it all the way to the NFL. So a lot of good playing, not so much betting early on in life for me, but that changed.
We got to name drop a little bit here, man. Who'd you play with?
Sure. So I played with, Trevor Cahill was a pitcher for a decade plus in the majors. He won a World Series with the Cubs on that 2016 team, was an all-star with the A's back in, I think it was 2010. And then played against Mike Leake, who probably had the best career of the guys that I got to play with or against. And then also Phil Hughes. My freshman year, I went to a high school in Orange County for a little bit. And he won a World Series with the Yankees in 2009, was also an all-star with Trevor Cahill. Again, I think that was the 2010 season. So it was just surreal to see 2 guys on the AL All-Star pitching staff. I was like, okay, this is why I couldn't hit so great when I was trying to make my way up. It was a little bit validating way too long after the fact. So yeah, that was fun to be in their company. And then I didn't play football, but went to high school with Leon Hall, who actually we were talking a bit pre-recording to peel back the curtain a bit. One of his more famous moments, aside from picking off Tom Brady on Monday Night Football, Leon went to Michigan, so you're probably quite familiar with him.
Yep.
He had, I believe he was the player on the Bengals who tipped a ball that, was it Brandon Stokely, who had a remarkable catch and run for a touchdown for Denver years ago? Leon was on the wrong side of that, probably played his position pretty well. That's one of his claims to fame. And then Russell Allen was a linebacker for the Jaguars for a few years. And then another guy with an odd claim to fame in the NFL, his name is Travis Gaethel, also a linebacker, played for the Raiders. And you might remember, Ed, it was probably 10 or 12 years ago at this point, there was a Chargers-Raiders Monday Night Football game, and the Raiders long snapper got injured in game. So they had to bring in anybody to attempt long snapping. And Travis, one of the guys I went to high school and middle school with, he was the guy that they called in because he had any experience in his life snapping. It hadn't been since high school. And they were playing in Oakland. They shared a stadium with the A's. So he had to try long snapping in the NFL on Monday Night Football off of the infield dirt when he hadn't done it in forever. It went horribly awry, but nobody could really blame him. It was just funny to look back and think of, some of the guys whose paths I'd crossed with much earlier in life.
Very nice. All right. So continue to tell us about your background in sports and betting.
Sure. So after some illustrious company in high school and getting through college, early on in my career, I remember working an office job, and one Monday morning, there was a guy who I was pretty good friends with, just came in with the biggest grin on his face. And this was a good job, but it wasn't the type of job where Monday morning was typically people's favorite parts of the week. So I asked him what was up. He seemed in a particularly good mood, and he started bragging about hitting a 3-team parlay in college football over the weekend. And I think betting, it requires a hefty dose of humility, but also a good bit of confidence to take on the market. And my confidence and ego definitely got a little bit fired up as he was telling me the story about his parlay, because I figured we're both sports fans. I like to think I know at least as much as he does. If he's hitting parlays and cashing big tickets, then I must be missing out. So I had him connect me with his account. I think, he was probably the type of bettor, had one offshore account, and that's the one that I made my first deposit with. Put down a whopping $50, and it has fortunately grown a good bit over time. And as I got more involved in it, I figured, okay, I've got an account now. I might do some research beyond my typical day-to-day sports consumption. And as I was listening to Colin Cowherd back in the day when he was still with ESPN, he would have RJ Bill on for the Blazin' 5. And I just remember Colin went on such a heater, and the picks seemed to be winning left and right. Probably some survivorship bias on my part, because I thought that I was really onto something tailing their picks. And it really got me hooked. I'm glad that the process has evolved over time, because that wasn't sustainable in the long term, as some people are probably painfully aware. But I remember Colin always introducing RJ Bell as being from pregame.com. And after, 10, 20, 30 times listening to that segment, one day I was just thinking, okay, let's check out pregame.com and see what this is all about. Most of it was fine. I could take it or leave it. But there was one column called Point Blank that really resonated with me. And it was written by a legendary bettor by the name of David Malinsky. And he just had a poetic way of writing about sports betting that was so elevated, but also so relatable at the same time. And as a novice bettor who liked to think I had a more sophisticated analytical approach, it really resonated with me. And I was so fortunate over the years to get to know David Malinsky. Ultimately, we struck up a friendship. I met him in Vegas several times. And during the 2017 NFL season, he approached me leading up to the season to start a podcast. And I was like, absolutely, let's do this. And it was his idea to focus on betting and beer. So kind of the precursor to Props and Hops was a podcast called House of Yards that I hosted with David Malinsky during the 2017 NFL season. Unfortunately, in the spring of 2018, Dave suddenly and tragically passed away. But I like to think that Props and Hops is, in large part carrying on his legacy and building on the foundation of what we got to do together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So was it similar? You're just talking about NFL betting and props or whatnot?
Yeah, it was fairly similar to the Props and Hops concept. In the case of my show now, I'm nowhere near the level of bettor that Dave was, or that, the current guys I speak with every week, Fabian, Summer, or Hitman would be when it comes to market reading and props, respectively. But when I was talking to Dave, he could speak to everything. We would focus on the marquee games in the NFL. We would also talk some college. Dave liked to poke fun at me and my alma mater, the USC Trojans. So we do a weekly segment with USC. And whenever we would talk beer, I would bring a beer of the week to the table. And he would always want to talk about possible pairing options with that beer. He was really into food and beer pairings. So a little bit of everything with Dave. It was just ridiculous. He seemed to know a lot about everything and be able to speak to it at whatever level his counterpart in a conversation came into something with. So if you're brand new to something, he could teach you in a way that, again, was still so approachable. But if you're ready to go toe to toe on the NFL or beer and think you know something, you were still going to learn something in every conversation with him.
Yeah, that's really tragic that he passed away. Also, I'm looking forward to getting into the cuisine and beer part of the conversation later. But before then, tell everyone a little bit more about Props and Hops and what listeners can expect from your podcast.
Sure. So Props and Hops is a podcast focused on two of my favorite things, sports betting and craft beer. And throughout this NFL season, I'm releasing episodes twice a week. So early to midweek, usually Tuesdays or Wednesdays, depending on schedules, especially around the holiday season. I'm connecting with Fabian Sommer, who is probably one of the most respected public handicappers out there. And he's just brilliant when it comes to reading the market. So we do a little spin-off Props and Hop show we've dubbed Between the Lines, getting Fabian's thoughts on early week betting market activity. And then I've coupled that with Hitman on Fridays. We do more or less the flagship Props and Hop show, just talking about some of our favorite prop bets of the week. We'll also talk some teasers, and that has been fortunately going a lot better lately than it was for about the first 2 months of the season. Right. So Between the Lines with Suma, just a lot more process, talking about market movement, not really a pick show by design, just trying to leave it to the audience to read between the lines, if you will. And then with Hitman, we'll get into picks for sure, but there's a lot of great process that he shares as well. And then at the end of every show, we definitely weave in our share of craft beer. So it's just been a joy to connect with both of them weekly throughout the season. People can find it anywhere they find their podcasts. And if you're into betting, I think there's plenty there for you. And if you're also into craft beer, then I think the last few minutes of each episode would be pretty good as well.
Matt, yes, you've been helping me with 7 Nugget Saturday, and a lot of these insights come from these two awesome pros that you have mentioned, Fabian and Hitman as well. And last week, Hitman recommended betting Patrick Mahomes for MVP, and he had a lot of good logic. Jalen Hurts was the favorite at that point, probably about minus 160. And he made the argument that, the Eagles would probably rest him the last week and had a tough environment in Chicago to play this weekend. And Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes and has more incentive to play because they don't have that 1 seed locked up by any extent. And it was interesting because I immediately bet it. I really liked the logic behind that. And it was interesting. I was walking up the street and talking to a friend who's like, oh yeah, I bet Mahomes for MVP too, which is not a conversation that happens like all the time, on my street. But anyways, I like that. And obviously Mahomes is minus whatever now. And that's not all the logic of Hitman. It obviously has to do with the injury to Jalen Hurts, which we'll get into in a little bit. So, love the work that you're doing with both of those guys. And that MVP bet is looking pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's one of the things I try to do with the show. It's fun to host it. And if I have a strong opinion on something, I'm happy to let it be known. But I really want to tee up these pro bettors who are world class at what they do. Just want to tee them up to shine and bring out the best possible insight. I feel like I'm learning right along with the audience throughout these conversations. So, I don't want to profess to be a pro bettor by any stretch or to have anything totally figured out, but just connecting with the right people and asking them the right questions can go such a long way. I find it fascinating and have been really happy to hear when other people have similar feedback on the show.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. So Matt, maybe tell me a little bit more about your process, about how you handicap the NFL and how numbers and data and analytics play a role in that.
Sure. I will say right off the top, I've never created a model. I don't code. I would like to get into that over time, at least learn some of the fundamentals with coding. And I'm sure the fact that I haven't created my own model will show in some of my results. I mean, I've done well a decade plus doing this, but again, it hasn't been life-changing money. I've just been doing it for fun and trying to find good information from people I can trust. And to that end, I often think of curation as my form of creation in terms of what I bring to the table with my handicapping process. I love to consume everything I can get my hands or ears on and try to apply a pretty tight filter from there. And really when things resonate is when I find alignment from a trusted inner circle. So again, shameless plug for my Props and Hops analysts who I just love working with every week. If I know that Suma is onto something or if Hitman's onto something, guys like Rob Pizzola, Cleve TA, Las Vegas Chris. There are a few more I could name, but not that many more. I feel like this space has so much content out there, and most of it is a little more than white noise. And I think that one of the things I do best is to identify the signal from the noise. And when I can find some alignment in the signal, then that's usually going to inform my handicapping process as much as anything. And a lot of these guys use analytics and numbers. So if I hear people mentioning EPA, completion percentage over expected, looking at a box score, knowing when yards per play might tell you one story that's more predictive than turnovers or late down success. There are certainly metrics that I look at, and I don't want to, pass off as somebody who just blindly follows people, but I look to augment my own opinion with those of the people I respect the most. And it's tough to get a ton of alignment. So that means I'm probably not playing, as many sides or totals as a lot of people in a given week. But when I do make bets, I feel like the consensus I can get from people who I do trust very highly leads to enough conviction to go ahead and lay the vig and take on the rest of the market.
Excellent. So you mentioned about 5 people, and definitely people that I trust and have had on my show. What does it have to be? Is it like if 2 of them are saying the same thing, then you're more likely to bet it, or maybe one of them has a strong opinion, but you like what he is saying about that, and then maybe you go with that? Like, how often is there consensus? How do you go about making those types of decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's no hard rule on it. It's not like, hey, I trust these 5 or 8 people or whatever it may be, and I need consensus from 3 of them. That's not exactly how I look at it. Sometimes it might be the case where, hey, a couple of them seem to have a soft lean to one side. Nobody's disagreeing, but if it's just a couple of small leans, maybe that's not enough to get in play. Whereas if just one of them has a really good handicap on something, then that'll catch my attention. But I really respect it. If there's disagreement, then I try to pay attention, I guess, to the why just as much, if not more, than the what. So I'm not in my head telling up, okay, 3 of them are on this side, 1 of them is on the other side. What do I do there? I just try to pay attention to a lot of the qualitative factors and the reasoning behind what they do. It's tough to give probably the clear answer that you're looking for to this question, because there's not a clear-cut methodology in my head. But just over time, I think it's like getting in the mental reps, listening to people. And I'm always on the lookout for, new people without the following or the, the exposure that some of these guys have. There are so many other voices that could be up and coming in the space, and they deserve a platform as well. And sometimes those are the best to catch on to, because they're not getting as many followers taking, the same action that I might be from somebody who is really well known and has a big following. So a lot of it just boils down to, the reasoning that I'm hearing. And if there is some good consensus, I think people often say it's an art as much as it is a science. And I'm sorry if it's a disappointing answer, but I feel like that process has just become so ingrained over the years for me. And it's, not bulletproof by any means, but it served me well. I just really haven't documented anything that puts it into a box. I think it really can vary week to week, especially in a year like this, when it seems like, sometimes every game I watch, I feel like I know less about the game. Just trying to lean on some people whose insights I really highly trust goes a really long way.
Are you trying to say that you know less about the game of the football after the last play of New England versus Las Vegas this past week, where with the unthinkable lateral in a tied game?
That was unreal, because I, as a Chargers fan, I was watching the Chargers kick their game-winning field goal at almost the same exact time this was happening. So I had the Chargers on the big screen, and I had Raiders-Patriots on the iPad. And as this is happening, I'm thinking, did I get confused as I was watching the Chargers game? Right. Did I forget which side of the field both teams were going toward? Or did I forget the score of the game? It just seemed too stupid to be true. That's something that we're going to remember forever. And the fact that as the Chargers are kicking a game-winning field goal, and that, last play kick to win a game is just a footnote, if that, to the ending of Patriots Raiders. Those two things happening simultaneously were a glorious turn of events for my favorite team's odds to make the playoffs. So, it was a crazy play and a very fortuitous play, even for my team that wasn't involved in that crazy Patriots Raiders endgame.
I wasn't exactly sober when that happened, so I was even more confused. Just trying to wait, what? Wait, but it says that the Patriots and the Raiders have the same number of points. So like, wait, like what's going on? And obviously you get all this stuff with Stanford ban. When you have crazy plays like that, it was just completely surreal.
I didn't bet a side in that game. Thank goodness the Patriots exposure I had was via a teaser, so they were still protected there. But I will say anybody who had a bet on the Raiders at Pick'em or -1 or -2, whatever they got, please think twice before complaining about a bad beat for the rest of your life, because that was about as good as it gets in terms of a fortunate victory.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, I really appreciate the kind of talk about curation in the work that you do. That has been something that I've been trying to do at the Power Rank. And I started doing it because, there were some people that are a lot smarter at internet marketing than I am that said, kind of curation is the next step in standing out, right? There's so much content out there. So it's no longer a game of like who can produce the content. It is who can filter the content, right? And so was how 7 Nugget Saturday got started. And just trying to push that forward, like having pros like Rob contribute to it every week. Going to be trying to do that more, as we head outside of the NFL season as well. So, I really like that approach. I think it's a smart approach. Just wanted to say that I've been trying that as well. You also mentioned, young up and coming people. Would you like to mention any of them? Because like these are people that I'm trying to find out about as well.
Sure. So there's one who comes to mind immediately, and I was fortunate to have him on Props and Hops for a good evergreen offseason interview. His name is Josiah Clark. He goes by @SharpClark NFL on Twitter. There's an E at the end of Clark. And his process is to watch every play of every game, and he has his own metric. I think he calls it effectiveness rating, where, it often won't always agree with EPA or other metrics that have kind of become more or less a holy grail in the analytics community. But I like knowing that he's looking at everything. And anytime he has an opinion, agree or disagree, he's got a lot of thought going into it and usually some pretty sound reasoning. So he's somebody who it's been fun to, connect with prior to this season and watch his profile really increase over the course of the season. But I mean, when I say his profile has really increased, there's still a lot of room for growth. He is currently at, 4,200 plus followers on Twitter. I think he was in the 700 range in the summertime when we spoke. Can't give Props and Ops all the credit for his profile really rising. He's doing some good work with 4for4 this season, and he maintains a website where he shares a lot of good info for free as well. So, people like that who just have a thought process that doesn't always mesh with the metrics, but it's because they're watching, they kind of blend what they see with their own eyes with their own quantitative approach. I think that can be really refreshing. And an approach like that, especially if something that, outside the box compared to somebody who is more analytical in the traditional sense, when there's consensus from different types of perspectives like that, that's an example of something that I will really give a lot of weight to.
Absolutely. And I really like finding out about people who somehow have the time to watch every play of NFL Sundays. I'm unfortunately finding that to be more difficult as, youth soccer takes up more and more of my life. And then, I did make the decision this year that like, I'm going to post my college football predictions as early as possible, which means Sunday afternoon, which is good for my customers, but is bad because I don't watch as much NFL. And I did have a chance to watch a lot this past weekend, which was really cool because there was no college football update. So, but I think, me as a bettor and as an analyst is trying to head towards working on the model more and kind of probably less watching. I mean, I still catch all the primetime games, but leaning on other people that do watch more of the games, like people like Rob, people like Fabian. It's learning from everyone. I think that's the best approach, right?
Yeah, and I'll even connect this to your college basketball approach. One of the ways I first discovered you, if not the way I first discovered you, was through tips on March Madness pools. And you would often talk about wisdom of the crowds, I think tying things back all the way to preseason AP rankings. And that seems about as unsophisticated as it gets. But I think that there is a through line there that can connect whether it's trying to win a college basketball pool, to handicapping the NFL, or to a point you brought up earlier. It's not to say that everything has already been figured out. There's probably an infinite amount of information that still hasn't been cracked yet. But so much of what we're capable of as humans in 2022 is already out there. There are so few people who by themselves are going to beat the market. And if they are, then you're probably never going to hear of them, because that's too precious to give up and go public with if you really want to make that edge last. So within the scope of people who I have access to through podcasts or, just content that anybody can find on the internet, I feel like it would be probably a good bit arrogant to think that I can outsmart all of them by myself. So it's a delicate balance of trying to really get in touch with what I think for myself and not have my opinion too clouded by the judgment of others. And at the same time, respect that if some of these people are just really at the top of their game, why would I not want to give very strong consideration to what they're sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, based on your analysis for this week, is there an NFL bet that you'd be willing to share with us?
Sure. This is one that people who have caught any recent episodes of Props and Hops will probably not be too surprised by. I'm looking at the board, and there is one teaser that stands out to me right now. I love finding teasers. Despite the rough go of it for the first couple months of the season, teasers that follow that classic Stanford Wong model crossing through 3-7, I think long-term are a good bet, especially when we're talking underdogs up through a touchdown in a lower scoring environment this year. Sometimes just letting math do its thing over time, I feel like, is a process that doesn't need to be tampered with.
Right.
And on this week's board, I'm looking at a 6.5 point teaser. So the standard vig for that, let's call it good, up to -130. Looking at the Jags, taking them from +1 up to +7.5 at the Jets, paired with the Bills, taking the Bills from -9 down to -2.5 against the Bears. And with the Jags, they are a consensus 1-point underdog, which I'm pretty curious about, because Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, but at this point, we're pretty much certain that Zach Wilson's going to be starting again on Thursday night.
I believe so. That's what my numbers reflect. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he had some good throws against the Lions last week. That's kind of all I can say about
some good throws and some mind-numbing throws and some even more mind-numbing decisions. It's definitely a bit of Jekyll and Hyde. And so maybe that introduces a degree of variance that wouldn't be great for this type of teaser. But what I look at here is, books like Circa, Chris, or Bookmaker, South Point, they're at Pick'em right now. And a lot of other books that are catering to a more recreational crowd have the Jets favored by 1. I wouldn't be surprised if the favorite were to flip prior to kickoff as more people realize that we're looking at Trevor Lawrence against Zach Wilson. Yeah. But with 1 widely available, I feel like the books at Pick'em are telling us that teasing the Jags up to +7.5, we're basically getting 7.5 points for the price of 6.5, considering some of these really sharp books that really are market makers are at Pick'em right now. I know the Jets have the better defense, home field advantage on a short week, but this quarterback mismatch just really stands out to me. And yes, Trevor Lawrence has had his turnover issues this season too. He had, about 1 million fumbles against the Eagles in a loss earlier this season. And he had another costly fumble as well as a pick against the Cowboys in a game that the Jags still managed to win. So I know it's not perfect, but Trevor Lawrence and this Jags team, given its current form against Mike White, getting more than a touchdown just seems like something that is too good to pass up, especially when we're talking a total of 38, some 37.5s out there. Lower totals for teasers just imply reduced variance, which is something you really want when you're teasing an underdog up through a touchdown. So that's most of my interest in the Jags explained. The second leg, much more simple. The Bills are just such a superior team to the Bears. We saw Justin Field get banged up last week. I fully assume that he's going to play and play quite well at times, probably rip off some more highlight reel runs. But when I have a chance to ask a team that's this vastly superior to do little more than win outright, it's dangerous. This is how a lot of people went down in Survivor very early this season. But I feel like asking the Bills, to beat the Bears by, just a field goal, if not more, makes for a second leg that I'm comfortable with pairing with the Jags this week. So again, Jags +7.5 at the Jets, Bills -2.5 at the Bears as a 6.5 point teaser, good at -130 or better.
That sounds really good. Rob Pizzola on my newsletter talked about how the Jags were set to be better simply because they had such poor red zone performance in the beginning part of the season, and that was only going to regress kind of their true skill level. So another thing in your favor there, probably not as important as playing a not so good team in the Jets, although their defense has rated out quite well this year, and I'm interested in following, how long they can kind of keep that up. And then that second, go ahead.
Go for it. I want to hear your thoughts on the second game as well. Before we move on from bets this week, I'll run a separate bet by you. But proceed with Bills Bears.
Yeah, just the weather in that game interests me, right? Because that total is really low because it's going to be 10 degrees and 20-mile-per-hour winds in Chicago. So again, reducing variance. The Bills should win that game pretty handily, but yeah, the conditions are just insane.
Yeah, and we've seen, the road favorite in the quadrant of teaser legs, home or away, favorite or underdog. The road favorite is the most precipitous, quadrant by far. That can get a little bit dangerous. So I don't say that this is a lock, or I don't encourage anybody to unload on this bet. But when I look at this week's board, I know the Bills are obviously the best team of the four between, Bills, Bears, Jags, or Jets. Honestly, I like the Jags leg quite a bit better, but I think the Bills bring enough to the table, getting them down under a field goal to pair with it for, a standard unit, or maybe even a slightly reduced stake, call it like 3/4 of a unit, not any, whales or 5-star locks. That's not in my arsenal as a bettor. I want to be sensitive to the fact that when it's cold, and the conditions we see in Chicago, if the Bills pass game is limited and it just, puts two run offenses against one another, that could tilt things a bit in Chicago's favor. So nothing bulletproof here, but I don't think anything is. So I just look for enough of an edge to get in play, and I see that with this teaser.
Is there a reason that you like teasers? Has this always been kind of a favorite bet for you?
Yeah, it all comes down to the number, both point spreads and prices. I almost exclusively tease through 3 and 7. I don't want to say that there's never a chance to do something different. A couple weeks ago, I really liked the idea of teasing Tampa Bay up at San Francisco. People probably remember, because that was recently enough that blew up in my face immediately.
Yeah.
But the thought there was that Tampa Bay was catching, at some books, it was either, plus 3.5 minus 120 or plus 3, even money. And in teasers, the juice gets neutralized. So if a 6-point teaser is minus 120, it's minus 120, whether you're teasing a team that's, point spread line, let's call it a team favored by 7.5, whether they're 7.5 minus 120 or 7.5 even money, the teaser just neutralizes the VIG altogether in that sense. So with Tampa, at a lot of books that had them at 3.5 minus 120, I'm like, okay, so you're starting at 3.5 when you should really be starting at like 3, or a true number would be like 3.25. So that's a bit of an advantage. Again, this is laying some VIG, minus 140 to get a 7-point teaser, getting them up through 10. It's like getting 7.5 points almost for the price of 7, and getting a double-digit cushion with a Tom Brady quarterbacked team against a Brock Purdy quarterbacked team in a game with a total in the mid-30s, like enough checked out. I'm just trying to give an example of, breaking the rule of absolutes of only teasing through 3 and 7. I recently teased the Bucks from 3.5 to 10.5. It lost in incredible fashion. But I think that, that's a sample size of one game. I think there are processes that can check out where you can explore other options and get a bit outside the box, but just proceed with caution, because, that Bucks game is the latest example of why you've got to be careful when you're deviating too much. Really, another piece to it is the price point. Some recreational books are charging a lot more than minus 120 for a 6-point teaser, and that's not worth it. If I'll make a bet at, a 6-point teaser, the precious few books still offering minus 110 or a lot at minus 120, I will make bets with those books that I wouldn't make at books charging minus 130, minus 140. So it all comes down to the number. And maybe it's me having a full-time job, and this is a side hustle that I'm very passionate about, but I'm not, at the forefront of handicapping games and uncovering edges, at the elite levels like so many people are. So if I just know that the math can do its thing over time, again, I know this year teasers have struggled a bit, but if I can just trust the math, it's an efficient marketplace, it's a lower scoring environment, then that's, in some ways it's, hey, where's the fun in handicapping? To which I would respond, where's the fun in betting purely for entertainment value if you don't think you have an edge? If I'm highly confident that I've got an edge, I will gladly place those bets and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, basically you like teasers because you can find value, you can find value in some of these numbers that you just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and sometimes it's comforting too. This isn't something I try to chase too much, but for some bettors, Baltimore was -6.5 in the look ahead line. We could have a whole separate conversation another day about the efficiency of look ahead lines with low limits and limited availability. But Baltimore was -6.5 hosting Atlanta, and now circa as we're talking just ticked up to Baltimore -8. I bet the Ravens -6.5. I would not bet them at -8. But if I still wanted exposure on Baltimore against Atlanta, thinking, hey, Desmond Ridder didn't look great in his first career start. This number is probably telling us something about Lamar Jackson returning. Okay, well, you can tease them down to -2 and find another leg. So teasers just offer a lot of flexibility in that sense. Whereas once a point spread moves off of a key number, it's not a death sentence to lay 3.5 in a game that had been -3. But usually that's not the mark of a winning bettor. And for teasers, if a game, ticks from +3 down to +2.5, okay, don't play the team, +2.5 if you can tease them up through 7 and 8. So it's just getting that added degree of flexibility, getting exposure on some teams that you might want to, even if the market is a step ahead of you at times. Because again, having a full-time job and, a pretty busy life outside of this, it's just one way to try to expand the attack surface when I can't be in front of an odds screen 24/7.
Absolutely. Baltimore Atlanta is pretty interesting. I mean, that line suggests to me that there's a decent chance that Jackson plays and comes back from that injury. I think Atlanta's been terrible. I'm not exactly sure why the markets have given them so much respect over the course of the last 2 months. So it's something where I'd like to bet Baltimore, but yeah, just with I don't know. I feel like the markets are onto that.
Yeah, and sometimes when the markets catch on to something, it means the ship has sailed if you're looking at betting against the spread, and that's not always the case with teasers. So that's something I like there. Ed, one bet I'm not sure that I like, but if I may steer this for just a bit, wanted to run something by you that I'm considering. So I'm looking at possibly putting something down on the AFC and the Super Bowl. I'm seeing a current point spread of the AFC -3 at even money, and I'm not sure if you've modeled this yet or had a chance to consider it at all. But as I look at the top of the NFC, now both the Eagles and the 49ers dealing with some quarterback question marks. The Cowboys in the last 2 weeks we just saw them lose to the Jags. They got taken to the brink against the Texans. I feel like the NFC is just wide open, and it wouldn't be shocking to see a wild card team make a deep run and perhaps win the conference. And in the AFC, it's not that everybody's a world beater at the top of that conference either, but I feel like, it's more likely that between Buffalo, Kansas City, Cincinnati, I feel more confident that we see one of the top 3 AFC teams as of today in the Super Bowl than any of the top 3 NFC teams. And for that reason, if we get something, like a Bills, Chiefs, or Bengals matchup against a wild card team, -3 even money might offer a heck of a lot of value. And I'm not sure that line is fully accounting for some of the quarterback question marks at some of the, top levels of the NFC side of things.
Yeah, no, I definitely like how you're thinking about that. I mean, I don't model this. I mean, you certainly could, because you can simply take the probability that the AFC wins the Super Bowl, which you could actually just take Unabated's calculator, and I'm sure that would spit that out at you, or you could do a pretty simple calculation there. I mean, I would say that, yeah, so I believe in Buffalo and Kansas City the most. And, Cincinnati has definitely grown on me over the course of this year. And it's a team I certainly trust, right? And so you're looking at 3 teams in the AFC that I think I trust more than Philly. So Jalen Hurts may play this weekend. We're going to get into that in a sec. But I think he's going to be fine by the time we get into late January, unless something else happens, right? But I guess I trust Philly less than any of those top 3 teams. So even if they did make it, I think I would expect, I can tell you right now, I'd make Buffalo about a 3-point favorite, even if Philly did make it. I think the actual market would be less. But then again, you're only talking about one team out of the NFC. Well, maybe San Francisco too. But when are we going to see the Brock Purdy that played the last 2 years at Iowa State, right? And not the Brock Purdy that's been pretty solid the last 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah. And one thing that gives me a little bit of trepidation with a bet like this is just, again, you're basically giving the book an interest-free loan. At this point, it's not too egregious. It's less than 2 months, but, depending on your bankroll, that money could go to better use in the meantime. Sometimes if there are one or two teams you want to ride or fade in the playoffs, you can just employ money line parlays instead of futures. So I rarely play futures like this, but just with the top of the NFC being so muddled right now, and the AFC, I know the Bills and Chiefs haven't looked, like world beaters in recent weeks, but Cincinnati coming into its own and still thinking Buffalo and Kansas City could definitely be favored over any NFC team. That just piqued my interest. So nothing that I've locked in or would tell people to rush to bet right now. But I like looking at, angles like that when we get news about Jalen Hurts' injury. To your point, he's probably fine in the playoffs, but the market moves so fast on the Eagles-Cowboys point spread, and then the MVP market moves, and things like this. If you can go down the menu a bit and try to think a little bit outside the box, that's how I think sometimes you can buy yourself a little bit more time to get down on edges as the rest of the market rushes to some of the more obvious initial answers.
Yeah, I love that, right? I mean, you need to, like, the surface that a sports book covers has to be pretty large, right? They want to bring in business, and there's a way to find advantages there. As the sharpest markets move, like, how can you find little edges in the other markets? And I think that's great. Let us move on to a couple of games I want to ask you about in the NFL this week. Philly's going to Dallas. I've heard that Jalen Hurts may play, but he's still obviously questionable right now. How much faith do you put in these Eagles and honestly the Cowboys for that matter, right? What do you think the prospects are for both this game and then the Super Bowl prospects for both teams?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like this game, oddly, for a Week 16 matchup between divisional rivals like this, probably not too closely related to the Super Bowl prospects for these teams, just given how the standings fall when they're going head-to-head this weekend. But for the Eagles, overall, evaluating them is a little tricky. I mean, they can only play the schedule that they're given. So I don't want it to be too much of a cop-out to ask who have they beat. Suddenly that Lions game in week 1, I think it was, is looking like one of their most impressive performances of the season. So at the same time, I want to give them credit for oftentimes, okay, you can only play who's put on your schedule. But again, as a Chargers fan, I know what it's like to have nail biters every week with teams you should be beating by margin. The Eagles have beaten a lot of teams by margin. So I do want to give them credit for that. Kind of putting those two things together, some mixed messages I feel like I'm getting as I try to read the team. I feel like the jury is out, and depending on the status with Hurts, the jury might be out until we hit the playoffs and they're really tested, perhaps in a way like they haven't been all season long up to this point. And for Dallas, I mean, they got tested right away, losing Dak for a good chunk of the beginning of the season. And once they held down the fort so well without him and seemed to be rolling when he got back, they were looking like potentially the best team in the conference. And then we look at them in recent weeks. Again, we touched on it a moment ago, but they got taken to the brink against the Texans and then just lost in overtime to the Jags, blowing a big lead in that game. I feel like they might be about as real as anybody in the NFC, but who really knows this year? I mean, when it comes to the Eagles and Cowboys Super Bowl prospects, I'm reminded of the late, great David Malinsky, and he would keep not only power ratings in terms of a number grade attached to each team, but he would also tie in a letter grade for confidence associated with his power ratings. I feel like the Eagles and Cowboys are both teams that get a high number grade, but a pretty low letter grade right now. So I wish I had more conviction, but I just feel like, yes, these are two of the best teams, if not the two best teams in the NFC. Niners definitely have to be in that conversation. But just on a week-to-week basis, that letter grade for confidence attached to these power ratings for the Eagles and Cowboys is quite the moving target.
Right, because I feel like, Jalen Hurts being an MVP type quarterback is a recent thing, right? And is it small sample size, or has he truly kind of turned the corner and going to be one of these elite quarterbacks? I think that's still open to question.
Yeah, I think it's been great to see what Nick Sirianni has unlocked with that offense. And it's been really impressive to see that, 1 week they're taking on the Titans and they know that it's going to be tough sledding on the ground. So they'll air it out and they can beat them with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And Hurts is throwing the ball well. The next week they get an opponent who's stout against the pass and they can just impose their will on the ground, including not only Miles Sanders, but Jalen Hurts himself doing a lot of the damage. So their versatility, I think, brings a lot to the table. I love it when a team doesn't just put its head in the sand and say, this is who we are, take it or leave it. They really adapt from week to week. I think that can take them far. I would just like to see more of that against a higher caliber of opposition, and it might be the playoffs before we can really see their true colors.
Absolutely. So Bookmaker has Dallas as a 4.5-point favorite over Philadelphia at home. That seems to suggest that Jalen Hurts is not going to play. Do you have any opinion about where the market is right now?
This is like the toughest time of week for me to read it, because once there's early, if somebody, had this news, and there was a window of a couple hours, Asuma talked about it on today's episode of Props and Hops, where there was a window of a couple hours where no mainstream media reporters were picking up the news about Hurts, but the betting market was kind of telling us as it ticked up and up and up for Dallas that Hurts probably wasn't going to play. Once you missed the boat on, the Cowboys, I think they were a 1-point favorite. And, once it got north of 3, that ship had probably sailed. And then the line got as high as 6. And at that point, I was thinking, hey, if and when we see 7, then it's probably time to look back the other way. And now 4.5, it's pretty much no man's land. I don't expect it to go back up to 6 or 7 or back down to 3 unless we get clear news on Hurts playing, in which case it might go back down. But then how close to 100% is he going to be? Being in the lineup isn't the same thing as being 100%. So all that considered, with the market where it is right now, if you got Dallas laying less than a field goal, great job. If you got the Eagles -6, well played. I don't see any edge in laying 4.5 or 5, given what we know right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you meant Philly +6 there. So,
oh yes, excuse me if I misspoke there.
No problem at all. Matt, another game I'm interested in asking you about is Green Bay going down to Miami. Green Bay still alive for the playoffs. They're actually getting healthy. A lot of their skill players are coming back and had a pretty solid win over the Rams on Monday night. What are you seeing? Oh, and Miami's had a pretty good season under the new coach. Tua looks pretty good at the quarterback position. What are you seeing in this game, and what do you make of these two teams?
This game is one that I think, again, to quote David Malinsky once again, I always think in terms of his lexicon. To me right now, seeing Dolphins -4.5, some 4s out there, it's tough to see a big edge, but a fascinating watch and learn experience. I feel like Miami, to your point, has been really impressive this season. Tua and Mike McDaniel have worked very well together. I think that Tua's got some limitations, and McDaniel has schemed very well to maximize Tua's talent. And when I say Tua has limitations, I don't want to pile on or pretend like he's not a good quarterback. His timing and anticipation and quick decision-making and at certain parts of the field, really pinpoint accuracy, that plays at this level. That can take a team a really long way with the right pieces and the right scheme. And the Dolphins have shown us that. But then we've also seen the league start to, adjust to the team's limitations. I think that what the Chargers showed on Sunday night a couple weeks ago was really telling. The Niners the week before that. Buffalo struggled a bit on Saturday night with some of the counters that McDaniel and Tua had to the league's adjustments. So it's becoming a bit of a cat and mouse game. I'm eager to see what Miami does with the run game. It looked great in Buffalo last Saturday night. Also, probably using some shorter passes to the perimeter, just targeting, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle over the middle of the field has been their bread and butter. But if teams scheme to take that away, then what can you do? With checkdowns, use the running backs and tight ends in the passing game as well. I think that that's into his arsenal, and McDaniel is smart enough to adjust. I'm just really curious to see just how strong of a counterpunch Miami has to the league's adjustment to an offense that was just on fire for pretty much the first 12 weeks of the season. And this week with Green Bay, it's going to be an interesting test because I feel like the Packers were left for dead a couple weeks ago. And it's still a long shot. They've got to win out to just stay alive. But the fact that they even have a pulse right now leads me to believe that, anything's on the table. And we've talked about how wide open the NFC is right now. And if the Packers can somehow pull this one out and go on to run the table, if we've got a Packers team getting healthy, peaking at the right time with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, if they're to, match up early on with a Brock Purdy-led team or, the Vikings in their current form, I don't know. I kind of feel like Green Bay might be one of those teams. They're in all likelihood not going to make the playoffs. But if things break their way, it's just crazy to think that they were pretty recently left for dead. And, lo and behold, they're still showing a pretty decent pulse after what they showed us on Monday night against the Rams.
Absolutely. I think, well, Tampa Bay is not showing a pulse, but there's a lot of similarities between Green Bay and Tampa Bay. A lot of my underlying past metrics, like both those teams on both sides of the ball. And you could be heading into the playoffs where Tom Brady is the underdog to a rookie quarterback. And, it's probably like where the market should be, but it's kind of an interesting situation. And, we'll see. I mean, Aaron Rodgers being an underdog, I don't know, maybe at Philadelphia or something like that, right? Is definitely a possibility. And if those teams can get healthy and start being the teams that we thought they were, which is kind of why, the preseason prior still kind of hangs out in my model right now, which is why these two teams are higher than they would be in models that only use data from the current season. Yeah, I think it could get really interesting as we head into the playoffs.
Likewise, it is just so wide open.
Yep. Matt, how about a surprising prediction for the rest of this NFL season?
Yeah, this one gets tricky because I've almost got to ask you if anything would be a surprise after what we've seen all season long. Aside from telling you that a team that is mathematically eliminated from contention is going to win the Super Bowl, I'm not so sure what would qualify as a surprise. But I'm going to continue with the theme of it, of how wide open the NFC is, and say that I think it's just looking increasingly likely to me by the week that I wouldn't be surprised to see an NFC wildcard team host the conference title game. And that's just speaking to the strength of the Lions' resurgence. The Cowboys not going to win their division, but they could be up there with the best teams in the conference. Typically, we would just assume, okay, the one seed getting the bye, that's never been more important. You just win one game and you're hosting the conference title game. Or what about, the other division winners? I wouldn't be surprised to see Tampa Bay or Minnesota go down at home in the wild card round. So, whoever sneaks into the back of the NFC playoff picture, I'm not thinking it's going to be a team like Green Bay even hosting a playoff game, because if they get in, they're going to be at the bottom of the barrel as far as that NFC playoff picture is concerned. But a team like the Cowboys, if they can go on a bit of a run, I just feel like this is the year where if you're an NFC playoff contender, not getting that first round bye or not winning your division isn't as much of a disadvantage as it has been almost every year in the past. So let's go ahead and say an NFC wildcard team will also be the home team come Conference Championship Sunday.
That sounds good. Matt, I also want to ask you real quick about your alma mater, USC. You have to be thrilled with what happened this season, how far they got. Obviously could have been more with the Pac-12 championship game, but Caleb Williams was hurt. Is he coming back for the bowl game? And what is Lincoln Riley going to do to fix that defense?
Oh, man, two good questions. Let me see what I can get. As much as I try to follow USC reporters, I feel like the market will tell us more than we'll often get from reporters, or at least they'll tell us first in many cases.
For sure.
I will say, I wish you weren't so freaking right about the Pac-12 title game with everything you were sending on your newsletter. Utah, that got off to a pretty brutal start for people who backed Utah, but it went from a blowout in one direction to a blowout in the other direction in the blink of an eye.
That's definitely why I sprung this on you, Matt. I wanted to take another victory lap on my Utah over you.
Yeah, I will say that was a tough pill to swallow, the way that game broke the final 2.5 quarters. But if you were to ask me Labor Day weekend if I would take that outcome for USC season, there would have been no hesitation. Seeing that a book like Circa, they were hovering around Pick'em for a while, or USC -1. They're up to USC -2. I feel like that's, at least a pretty decent lean that Williams is going to play. He's said that he intends to play. Also, Tuli Pelotu, their awesome defensive end. He was first team All-American and probably going to be a very high pick in the NFL draft. I thought he might opt out, and he has been pretty intent on playing as well. I'm still looking for confirmation on a few other key pieces. I would guess that Williams is going to be a go based on what the market's telling us right now. I feel like that still doesn't tell me that Williams is going to be at full strength.
Right.
And the offensive line, they had another big injury. I think it was Brett Nealon who went down near the end of the Pac-12 title game. USC had a surprisingly good offensive line this year, and they've lost some pieces in recent games due to injury. And then I just feel like with Tulane, this is so weird. This is where it gets outside of my usual wheelhouse a bit, because bowl games motivation really does matter. And a lot of the narrations can come to life in ways that I don't think they play out as often as people like to think in regular season NFL games, when most of the time motivation is just about 100% across the board. But I feel like, this is the morning Pacific time of Monday, January 2nd in Dallas. Tulane's going to have probably quite the home field advantage in terms of having a lot more of their fans make the short trip from New Orleans. The Cotton Bowl is a marquee bowl game, but it is, a consolation prize at best for USC after the Pac-12 title game. I feel like there should be more focus on hitting the transfer portal, trying to, use this, extra few weeks of practice to build the team for next year. If USC wins the game, great. If they don't, who cares? For Tulane, if they win this game, it's like the best season in their history. So I feel like this is a sense where it really does matter more to them. What's the current money line? Yeah, it should be. Okay. So there are still some +10s, +120s on Tulane out there. I feel like, maybe I'd wait for Williams news to become official. Maybe that even ticks up higher. I feel like anything plus money, Tulane on the money line is the way that I'd look to bet that game, just because I don't know what incentive. It's crazy. I know it's the Cotton Bowl, a New Year's Bowl game, but compared to Tulane, like what incentive does USC have to go all out? I think they're already hitting the transfer portal pretty hard. Lincoln Riley's recruiting acumen speaks for itself. It's not like they need this win to lock in any recruits. I don't think that's going to be a make or break factor. So I just expect it to be the kind of game where one team is all out and the other team is just there. And I think that the other team that's just there in this case is probably going to be my alma mater.
Matt, I'd like to end the show with some potentially non-sports questions. What's your favorite book?
Sure. So I feel like it would be remiss not to mention The Logic of Sports Betting, which we kind of touched on a bit earlier, talking about attack surfaces for sportsbooks and all the offerings they present. For any up-and-coming bettor, or even anybody who's been around and hasn't read it yet, I think that is just such a good book to really get in touch with the fundamentals of betting. I wouldn't say that reading that will turn you into a winning bettor, but I'd say that not reading it is almost consciously stacking the deck against yourself. So highly recommend that. Beyond the sports betting realm, really my favorite book overall, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He is a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist, just brilliant psychologist, essentially. He explains things in this book in ways that were just so eye-opening to me. I think of a conversation I had with Adam Chernoff on Props and Hops, probably a couple of summers ago. And Adam was actually talking about David Malinsky, recurring theme in this conversation. Adam would talk about following Dave's work over the years and say, geez, he explained something that I'd never thought of. How did I miss that? It was right there in plain sight. And yet he would explain it in such a concise, digestible way for any audience. I feel like that sports betting comparison applies to what Kahneman does in Thinking Fast and Slow, just in terms of general biases that we all have as humans in all walks of life. And it certainly bleeds into betting. Being aware of different biases, like loss aversion is a big one. And people love to consider that cash out button or hedge their bets, even if it's a minus EV proposition. I get it. I don't fault anybody for doing it, but understanding the process and trying to challenge my own biases if I can be aware of them, I just feel like that is advantageous for me in betting and pretty much any walk of life. Mm-hmm. And Thinking Fast and Slow has been an absolute game changer as far as becoming aware of those biases and different thought processes all come together. Not an easy beach read, although I am enough of a nerd that I definitely did read some of it at the beach as I was going through it. But just one of those books that, again, kind of like Logic of Sports Betting, is a foundational component for any sports bettor. Anybody who just wants to optimize the way they think about life in general, I would say Thinking Fast and Slow is one of the first places to start.
That's awesome. I haven't gotten through it because it's not an easy read, but you definitely would recommend it because it's worth it in the end.
Yeah, and I really did enjoy a lot of the concepts I found. I will say that if you don't want something that might just seem too dense or it's not, fun or lively enough, I totally get it. Just because it's my favorite book, if somebody doesn't like it, I would take no offense, and I would actively encourage somebody, if you read a quarter of this book and you're not loving it, or any other book for that matter, there's a million other books out there. Put it aside and go find something that will be more fulfilling to you. There's nothing wrong with quitting something when it's no longer worthwhile. So it's cool that you've given it a shot too. But
well, I haven't given it a shot.
I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's perfectly okay.
I have not yet given it a shot. So I
thought you said you had tried it and it just wasn't working for you. But if you do try it, then I'll be curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I hope to get to it. The Logic of Sports Betting is fantastic. If you sign up for my email newsletter, you can get a free PDF copy of it. So definitely check that out at thepowerrank.com. Matt, you did mention that reading that book will not make you a winning sports bettor, but I would argue I don't think there's any single document in the world that you can read that will make you a winning sports bettor. So sure. I don't think that it's definitely not detracting from the book. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah, and I think I will say pretty unequivocally, it will make you a better, whatever level you are at after reading a few pages of that. It's going to elevate you pretty substantially.
Absolutely. Matt, how about your best culinary experience and how beer might have played a role in it?
Sure. So if I think about my best culinary experience, beer actually did not play a role in it. And that's because I was in Barcelona with my wife on our honeymoon, and we were having black rice paella, outdoors. Barcelona had this, really nice street with alfresco dining before it was a big thing everywhere, well before the pandemic. And it was just this beautiful summer evening in Spain. We're having this amazing paella, and the setting also played a big role, and not just, great food, but, with my wife literally in the honeymoon phase of the relationship, you could say. But the surroundings were just flawless. We were right next to Sagrada Familia, which is just one of the most breathtaking things I've ever seen in my life. It's a church that Gaudi got started working on in his day, and there's still an active effort to complete the structure pretty soon. But they're doing, there are a lot of tours of it, and it's just one of the landmarks of Barcelona. Anybody who's been there has probably seen Sagrada. And just to be just right in the shadows of this amazing place with so much history, again, not only amazing food, but my favorite person. It was just one of those times where, there was no way that I would have rather been anywhere else in the world with anybody else, probably eating anything else. And I'll wrap it up by saying that even though beer did not play a role, sangria definitely did. So there was some tie-in along those lines.
Wait, so my family and I are headed to Barcelona. So do you remember the name of the place?
I will have to look and see if I can get it to you offline.
Yeah, find it to me and I'll put it in the notes.
I know the street that it was on. Right. I'll do some research.
Paella place near the familiar,
Paella in Barcelona.
Yeah, there we go.
There's got to be only one spot.
Yeah.
I will say if there is a culinary experience somebody's looking for that beer can play a role in, especially this time of year, there is a great beer that I think pairs well with a lot of different foods. It's called Celebration Ale by Sierra Nevada.
Yeah.
And it's an annual rite of passage. They release it every year right around, sometime between Halloween and Thanksgiving. And it's usually available pretty widely across the country through Christmas and New Year's. And it's a good IPA. It's actually a bit darker in color due to the malt that they used. So it's got some of that citrusy, piney flavor, but also a bit more of a malt backbone. So if somebody's not a hophead, I think that actually makes it more approachable. And pairing something like Celebration Ale, I mean, it is an IPA, so it's a somewhat big beer. I think it stands up to, any kind of big or bold flavors. I think just going like, an all-American, holiday meal like Celebration Ale and a cheeseburger or a good steak. I know some steaks go really well with red wine, but I would say Celebration Ale can probably stand up to just about any wine as well. It's just a case where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when you get a beer like that paired with a nice substantial meal as well.
Nice. I remember Celebration being like a bit spicy almost, right? With some of the flavors that they put in there.
Yeah, as far as IPAs go, it's definitely got a touch more of that than you would typically find. But it's funny, they call it a fresh hop IPA because they use hops from, like, hop harvest happens every year, like late summer, early fall. And for Celebration, they don't freeze the hops, which most breweries do for most IPAs to ensure that the hops last, the whole year to get them through all the IPAs they're going to produce. They use fresh hops, just take them basically, from the field to the brew house and make this beer as quickly as they can. So that's a different dynamic. Again, the malt they use, it's a little bit darker. Definitely has like some spice going on that you would not find in a typical IPA. I mean, this beer is not pale in appearance, so IPA is a bit of a misnomer. But I do feel like because of that, it almost brings even more versatility in terms of different foods that you could pair with it. A lot of times they say, maybe it's common with wine and other drinks as well, but with pairing beer with food, they say often if you pair the color of a beer with, a certain color of food, that's a good litmus test. So Celebration Ale being a bit amber, anything with red meat is probably going to work very well together.
Nice. So Matt, I am a hophead. So what are you recommending for me in the IPA world these days?
I recommend that you get out to California, especially during the winter time, and check out just the embarrassment of riches we've got here. On a national level, I think Celebration is one of my favorite beers that would be widely accessible right now. I've just been so spoiled in California during the pandemic. One silver lining that I will take among all the mayhem is that restrictions have really loosened for breweries to ship throughout the state. So
nice.
I can get, Russian River makes a legendary IPA called Pliny the Elder. And that's been a very highly sought after West Coast IPA for a long time. Now what they're doing, couple times a year, they will double dry hop it and do a canning run. So you can get double dry hop Pliny the Elder shipped to your door anywhere in California. And I got to experience that luxury a couple weeks ago. And it's been awesome. And at the same time, it's probably, put up some blinders for me in terms of what's going on in the rest of the country. I have been encouraged to see that some states have started to ship, beyond their own state's boundaries. So there's a brewery called Equilibrium in New York. And they might ship to Michigan. I'm not sure if they're in the distribution footprint off the top of my head, but they just recently started shipping to California. They've shipped to Nevada for a while. They've got a lot of the Midwest and Northeast covered, if I'm not mistaken. So Ed, that might be accessible for you. Equilibrium, based out of New York. They have just been one of my favorite breweries since the first time I had one of their IPAs a few years ago. And that is one that a good chunk of the country can get access to.
Equilibrium just has a flagship IPA that you recommend trying?
They have a few. I think they have one called MC Squared. The can art plays off of Einstein a little bit. That's probably one of their flagships. That's really good. But they have a lot of beers that they will make a few times a year. So it's not a guarantee that any given day you can get a specific IPA off of their menu. But most of the time you're going to have plenty of options, whether somebody's able to visit them or actually get delivery. They have a pretty big menu. And again, they're blanketing a lot of the country. I think a lot of their IPAs probably have fairly similar characteristics. So unless you're really into the weeds on different hops and nerding out over it, just about any IPA that they offer, you can't go wrong with.
Awesome. Going to check that out. All right, Matt, last question. If you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Yeah, this will probably surprise nobody based on how the conversation has progressed so far. I did not plan on mentioning his name this much, but I've got to say it one more time. The legendary David Malinsky. I was really fortunate to have shared a few meals with him while he was alive. And one of the reasons I think he's the best answer to this question is that he always had the best restaurant recommendations. I mean, you could have asked him, okay, what's the best place for liver and onions in Las Vegas? You just go off the reservation and he would know somebody. He knew every mom and pop restaurant. He was just so in touch with that scene. And he would be all about exploring the full menu from, appetizers, main courses, desserts, certainly some beer pairings to sneak in, or perhaps some wine. So from the standpoint of getting, a really good dinner, that in itself would be reason to think of somebody like him. But also, of course, the conversation. I've touched on the fact that he just seemed to know so much about so many topics. I mean, so many people knew him for what he did in sports betting, and that alone hardly begins to define him. I remember that a lot of meals with him, I would think I was going to see him for 1 hour, and it would easily become 3 or 4 hours. There was a time where I was in Vegas visiting a friend who lives out there. So I borrowed his car to go grab lunch with Dave, and I just lost track of time. And 3 or 4 hours later, my buddy's texting me, hey, I need my car back. I thought you were just going for a lunch. I've got to, get some stuff taken care of. There were times where I was with my wife and my brother on a Vegas trip, meeting up with Dave, and we found street parking somewhere in downtown Vegas and just constantly maxing out and refeeding the parking meter because we just couldn't bring ourselves to end the conversation. And my wife would not let me get away from this without emphasizing that Dave was also really good with picking out desserts. And he had the mindset of, if 2 or 3 desserts look interesting, let's just, try them all. We don't have to finish it, but just try a little bit of everything. Right. Yeah. It was just, so much fun. So amazing conversation. It's easy to just let time fly by, and very fortunate to have shared the time and meals with him that I did. But if I got one more crack at it, then wouldn't hesitate to put him at the top of the list.
That's awesome. Do you want to give one specific place in Vegas that you guys went to that you would recommend?
Yeah. So Dave's favorite restaurant was Lotus of Siam. And so I try to get there every time I can. It's a world-class Thai place, and it's pretty well known. I would encourage anybody who likes Thai food to definitely put it on the radar for any future Vegas trips. Usually, but they take reservations through their website, and it's pretty easy to use. So I would say, if possible, try to give it at least a couple weeks lead time if you want dinner on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday night. But they just crank out world-class Thai food. And the best part about it, the food is delicious. The service is awesome. And compared to a lot of other cuisines, I mean, if we talk about in the betting world, you're always looking for value, trying to find the best price on what you want. It's hard to beat, in terms of world-class cuisine. Thai food is about as affordable as it gets. So you can get an awesome meal, great service, and not really have to break the bank for it. So would really highly recommend Lotus of Siam. And I know that was a favorite of Dave's as well. In fact, during the football season, he was so regimented that from Friday afternoon to Monday morning, he wouldn't leave his house because he'd spend Friday prepping for, everything for a full board of college football Saturday, and then grade games all throughout Saturday. His results came in. Sunday rolls right into NFL. And then to make sure that he was staying fueled for these football weekends, he would go to Lotus of Siam and order meals basically to feed himself from Friday at lunchtime through Sunday at dinner time.
Wow.
And Lotus of Siam, the staff there came to know him as Friday Dave, because every football Friday, he's the guy coming in with a big order. Just such a consistent routine, treated everybody well, and they reciprocated. So that's a legendary spot. And Dave is far from the only one to be in love with it.
That is awesome. I'm actually headed to Vegas soon, and I'm pretty sure a thread of a bunch of the guys that I'm going with had Lotus of Siam on there. So we'll make sure to check that out. Matt Landis.
One thing, if you're not too into spicy food, they're not messing around. I did go one time, and they'll ask you, scale of 1 to 10, how spicy do you want it? I want something mild. Let's go with 5. That 5 to them was like an 8 for me, and I was definitely sweating. So some people love the punishment and go for the 10. I wouldn't fault anybody for going toward the 1 or the 2 range if you're not too sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say 4 or 5 for me. Got a little sweat is good.
Yeah, I mean, a 4 or 5 at Lotus is probably like I would guess like a 7 or 8 as a place that's maybe not quite as authentic. But again, you're going to have a good experience almost regardless, as long as you can handle the spice.
Matt Landis, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find your good work.
Sure. So the Props and Hops podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, coming out twice a week throughout the duration of the football season. And then Twitter's a good spot at mlandis18.
Matt, thanks again. This is Ed Fang. I'm honored to be your host for the Football Analytics Show. I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Matt Landis. Please check out all the good work that he does over at the Props and Hops podcast. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.